This is Chapter 3 Selections, Programming Exercise 10, Game Addition Quiz. So we have Lesson 3.3, SubtractionQuiz.java, which is a class that randomly generates a subtraction question. So what we're going to do is revise the program to randomly generate an addition question with two integers less than 100. So how are we going to do this? Well, first we're going to take a look at how this SubtractionQuiz.java works. Alright, we're going to read it, understand how it works, and then we're going to modify the code so that we're going to make it add two numbers less than 100, and we're going to test, make sure it works, and test it again. Alright, so I got the code right here, and we're going to go through it and make sure we understand how this class works before we modify it. Right? If we don't understand how it works, it's going to make it a whole lot harder to make any edit to the program. Alright, so we're going to start off with the beginning, right? This code is pretty short, from line 16 to line 34. So that is about, what, 18 lines of code? Yeah. Alright, so we're going to start from line 16. We have an integer, and this integer variable is called number1, alright, and it's going to create a random number, and it's going to multiply it by 10. And it's going to cast that number as an integer and store it into this variable number1. And that's going to be the same thing for this variable number2. Use the math class. Math class have a random method, right? And it's going to generate a random number, and we're going to take that random number and multiply by 10, cast it as an integer, and store it into this variable. So that's going to happen to these two variables right here. So after we do that, right, after the program does this, it's going to do a little check. If number1 is less than number2, then we're going to take the smaller number, number1, right, if that's the case, and we're going to store into another variable called temp. That way, whatever variable that's in number1 right now, it's going to be stored into a variable called temp, and then we're going to take number2 and store into number1. And then after that, number2 becomes what was number1. So basically, let's get a little bit of a visual right here. Let's say number1 equals 1 and number2 equals 2. Now, is num1 less than num2? Is that the case? Well, yes, of course, because 1 is less than 2. Therefore, if this case is true, this if statement passes and will run what's inside the if statement. So what happens next is a variable called temp is created, and we're going to store whatever value number1 was, num1, which in this case will be 1. So now temp is equals to 1. And now we say num2 is whatever value num1 is, right? I'm sick. Whatever value num2 is will now be stored into num1. So in this case, num2 is 2. So now num1 is equals to 2. And we say num2 equals whatever temp was. And since temp is 1, we basically switch the number around. Num1 now equals 2 and originally equals 1. Num2 originally equals 2, now equals 1. We switch that around. So why do we do that? Well, let's find out. Why does this program do this? By reading further into the code. And it basically actually before I delete that, let's keep that for a bit. It says, hey, print out this. What is num1 subtracted by num2? Now, what happens if num1 is 1 and num2 is 2? Well, if a small number gets subtracted by a larger number, then the resulting sum is a negative. And in this case, we actually don't want the user to solve for any negative numbers, so we switch it around. And because we switch it around, in this case, if num1 was smaller than num2, we switch it around. Now num1 is actually larger than num2. And if you were to display this, num1 subtracted by num2, it will display 2 minus 1 instead of 1 minus 2. Alright? So hopefully that makes sense, and we'll continue on to the next line of code, which says, okay, I'm going to create a scanner variable called input that takes in the system input. And with that, I'm going to say, hey, whatever you input in the console, I'm going to read the next integer and store that into a variable called answer. So let's say the output was, what is num1 minus num2? Let's say 2 minus 1. What's 2 minus 1? Well, you would now solve it by saying, by entering the correct answer. And in this case, let's say 1. You enter 1, and this will capture that input and store it into this variable called answer. Now answer will now equal to 1, which is what you input, or another integer that you may have input. And the next line of code, line 29, it does a check. It says if num1 minus by num2, does it equal the answer? Well, right here, it'll perform the math, it'll perform the calculation, and it'll do a check. This equal sign is not the same as this equal sign here. This equal sign assigns a value. So whatever value temp is being assigned to number 2. This equal checks for the similarity, or checks if the value literally equals one another, right? So basically we have num1 minus num2 checking if it equals with the answer. Now, if it's true, right, if this value and this value here is the same, then it'll print out you are correct. Otherwise, it'll print out your answer is wrong, and then it'll print out num1 plus, num1 concatenate, the minus sign concatenate with num2 should be, and it displays the actual correct answer. Alright, so let's try to run this and see how all of that looks like. Alright, so what we have here is, what is 9 minus 0? Well, let's answer correctly. 9 minus 0, well, if 9 is subtracted by nothing, that's of course 9. And it'll instantly say you're correct, because what happens is this 9 is going to be stored in this variable right here, answer. Alright, it's stored right here, and then the program does its own calculation. 9 minus 0 equals 9, which is the answer. And if 9 equal 9, then print this out and do not continue to this else statement. But if this else statement, this statement right here is incorrect, then print out this else statement. So let's try to actually get this part, this else part of the if statement running. Alright, so the next question is, what is 5 minus 4? Well, if I enter 9, purposely got incorrect, it'll jump to this else statement and say, hey, your answer is wrong. The correct answer is num1, which is 5, subtracted by num2, which is 4, should be, right? And it does the calculation and it displays the correct answer. Alright, so hopefully with that explanation, you know how this program works. And what we're going to do is now modify it according to how this want us to, or this question want us to now change it to, or revise it to. In this case, it wants us to revise the program to randomly generate an addition question with 2 integers less than 100. Alright, so we're going to play around and make sure that whatever number that it generates will always be less than 100. So let's try that first. What if I multiply it by 100, right? will it ever generate any number that is going to be greater than 100? Well, let's run it a few times and let's see what happens. So the first result is I get 90 minus 48. So far, let's remember, this 90 here seems to be the max number that we get so far. So 90 is largest, right? That's good. Okay, it's not greater than 100, but it hasn't reached the max number that I wanted to, which is 99. Something that's less than 100, not greater than 100, and not less than 0. So if it's less than 100, my max value should be 99. So will it reach it? Let's see. So far I get 66, right? So far 90 was the largest. 97, all right. So far I believe with this we should be able to get 99. And if the reason behind it, I recommend reading the math that random class and understanding how that works. Right? But the short explanation is we simply get some decimal value and we multiply that decimal value by 100 and cast that decimal value to an integer. Okay, so far I have 96. So far I like what I see. It's not going past 100 and it's nothing less than 0. So that works out really well. And because of what we have here, it'll always have the first number as the larger number and the second number as the smaller number. And in some case where they're equal, then nothing changed. 98 minus 90, which is great. Nothing that's 100 or larger. Fantastic. All right, one last run just to make sure. 98. We haven't had 99, but I'm pretty sure it will appear. All right. So with that checked, and pretty satisfied with what I got, I have satisfied one part of the code, which is make sure those two numbers are less than 100. Perfect. Next thing is to make sure to add these two values. So how do we do that? Well, which part of the code asks us to subtract? So let's go through here, right? Right here doesn't ask us to subtract. It's just requests us to generate two numbers. So we're good with that. Right here just switches the number around. The smaller numbers will go as this will become the second number. The larger number is on the left, small on the right. So that's good. That is the case right here. What is this number subtracted by this number? Well, that's what I have to change. So I'm going to change that to a plus. But that's not the only place, right? We go a little further. This is where we store the answer. We have an if statement that does a check. This number 1 minus number 2 equals the answer. No, we want to do plus sum of this, all right? And then there's one more place where if you're not correct, there's an else statement here that does the actual correction. So num1 minus, change that to a plus, and should be num1 plus num2. Okay, there we go. We're pretty much done. Let's run this a few times and make sure it's correct. So what is 83 plus 77? Let's say it's 160. Cool, that's correct. Now let's try to get it wrong. What is 65 plus 7? Let's say 70. Nope, your answer is wrong. 65 plus 7 should be 72. It is definitely adding them, right, and not subtracting and showing the correct sum. Right, let's try it two more times. Let's try to be correct this time. What is 91 plus 41? So let's say 132. Correct. All right. And let's try to get it wrong this time. What's 71 plus 32? 70. Well, no, your answer is wrong. 41 plus 32 is 73. Now, all this time, I notice that it will always be larger number on the left, smaller number on the right. But in this case, it doesn't really matter. All right. It's because we're adding them. And when we're adding two numbers, we will always get a positive number and not a negative number. And if that's the case, we don't really have to worry that the smaller number is on one particular side. So that's something that we should also try to catch and try to fix if it is unnecessary or redundant or extra code that could slow down or add more bugs or issues with the code, right? So in this case, I could remove it. I don't really have to. It doesn't really impact my code that much, and it doesn't really cause me any issues. So in this case, I'll just leave it, and I'll just double check, look through it, and make sure that everything is good, and there are no bugs that really stands out or that I could catch and fix. All right. So that is it for this exercise, where we change it from subtraction to addition, and make sure to increase the number that we're adding up to 99, but not anything greater. All right, and we make sure that if it's correct, it'll display so, and if it's incorrect, it'll add the number correctly and display it as it should be.